There may be no few better players in the NBA than Udonis Haslem, but being underrated is no new thing for the former undrafted player, and with a career scoring total double that of former #1 overall picks Zion Williamson and Ben Simmons, maybe it's time we start looking at him in a different way. Look no further than the 2020-2021 NBA season where per 36 minutes, Udonis Haslem averaged 48 points per game. This is MVP level play should the Miami Heat allow him to take over the league. This would be the second greatest scoring season of all time, just behind Wilt Chamberlain. But maybe Haslem isn't a Tom Brady. Maybe it is time for him to finally exit his prime at 42 years old. But despite this, the Miami Heat have still kept him on the roster, where the entire league knows him as just another member of the Heat's coaching staff. Coming off an offseason where many fans thought the Miami Heat were just wasting money by re-signing Haslem to his 20th NBA season, the recent success of Miami is proving them all wrong. Not even just this season, but in the years before that, where the Miami Heat have made 3 of the last 4 Eastern Conference Finals, and despite being overlooked nearly every single season, the Miami Heat have proven themselves to be consistently top-performing playoff teams. Who is the single most successful playoff team over the last 4 seasons? It's not Milwaukee, Phoenix, either the LA teams, Philly, Golden State, or even the Boston Celtics. Because since Jimmy Butler was traded to Miami at the start of the 2019 season, the Heat have been by far and away the most consistently successful playoff team. They lead the entire league in playoff victories with 36 victories in the last 4 seasons, the next most being Boston with 33 and Milwaukee at 29. And while playoff Butler deserves a ton of credit as their success starts with him in his Miami tenure, there is a little bit more to that, and I believe it is around the undrafted 20-year veteran big man. Udonis is known as one of the best locker room presences and leaders within the entire NBA. He is the epitome of the Miami Heat culture, focusing on competitiveness, toughness, and professionalism. While on paper, Haslem may not provide the on-court value his $2.6 million salary would suggest, but the kind of leadership that we don't see, the locker room interactions, the creation of good habits in rookies, and the continuance of a long-running Miami Heat culture, this is all priceless, and I don't believe that there is another coach or player in the league that could do to the Miami Heat what Haslem does. How else do you explain a team that has more undrafted players than lottery picks shows so much success? Sure, Eric Spoelstra is one of the greatest coaches in recent NBA history, but are you seriously telling me that Gabe Vincent, Caleb Martin, Max Strus, and Duncan Robinson would be the same players if they didn't have UD in the locker room? Haslem, as an underdog himself, knows what it's like to not hear his name on draft night, and he knows exactly the kind of work it takes not only to make the NBA, but to stay in it for so many years. Look at the ever-evolving Ja Morant situation. The Grizzlies are obviously an incredibly talented team with some of the biggest superstars in the league, but despite this, and despite making the 2 seed, we hardly saw a flame from them in the playoffs. With Ja Morant being suspended this season and potentially looking at another suspension to open up next year, fans have wondered if his immaturity may be partly due to a lack of locker room leadership. With the oldest players on this year's team being a 29-year-old Steven Adams and 27-year-old Dillon Brooks, this year's Memphis squad may be a team to look at when you have talent but not the leadership to help it grow and keep it on track. If you put Ja in Miami, or if you put someone like Haslem in Memphis, does this situation really go down the same way? Of course, it's impossible to say, but it's something that I highly doubt. That Haslem and the Heat would put up with the situation in the exact same way as Memphis has. And Memphis is far from the only team who has had a culture issue. The Rockets and Hornets are 2 teams who have also been struggling when it comes to developing a me versus we culture. Guys who hoop for highlights or hoop to put up big box scores that doesn't necessarily translate to winning. Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr. are 2 incredibly talented guards who can score on just about anyone in the league and put up the sort of highlights that can make them go viral. But putting up numbers, or even showing a yearly increase in those numbers, doesn't necessarily mean that they're developing in the proper way. Honestly, someone like Kevin Porter Jr., a late round draft pick who has shown the ability to have pure talent at an incredibly young age, would be a perfect candidate to turn himself around in Miami's culture. With Haslem experiencing success in more than just winning the finals, he knows what it takes to be on a winning team, because as we've seen in places like Chicago, winning is a culture, not just adding names on paper. So if you ask me, the few million Miami has paid Haslem is well beyond worth it. Every single contract that he has received has been well beyond worth it. But one more thing that I wonder with him is if he can start a change. There's strong evidence of Haslem being a part of the success Miami has seen, even if what he is doing is mostly off the court. But this makes me wonder, will other teams follow suit? That being, using a roster to keep a veteran or mentor-like player as an active player instead of a coach or consultant. Because while many point to Haslem as just another coach, the way I see it is a little bit different when he suits up with you every game, when he practices with you every day, when he shows up an hour before you do to work out. That's the difference between a coach coaching you or a player mentoring you. So should this trend continue on, and if it does, who are some of the players that could become the next culture-defining player coach? Right now, there are 5 active players who I think could excel at a UD-like role towards the end of their careers. And with an honorable mention to Chris Paul, while he is a great leader and has an advanced mind for the game, of course, he's also set to make $60 million over the next 2 seasons, and I don't know if Paul would take a minimum contract coming off the bench as opposed to retiring. But the 5 I think have a legitimate chance to have a player coach or at least be a serious mentor in the NBA a few years from now include Kyle Lowry, Draymond Green, Derrick Rose, Kevin Love, and DeMar DeRozan. Let's start with Lowry, as he is a veteran of the game who has experience both as a star and as a role player. He is a champion on the 2019 Raptors and has turned his career around in Miami. Like many others, he has been doubted but saw a revitalization with the Heat culture. Whether he retires in Miami, goes back to Toronto, or goes onto a mentor position within a different team, I think he can help instill a new culture for a team that needs it, and one based off of the current Miami culture. And next is Draymond Green. Green is obviously not the greatest player in the world pure skill wise, however he does possess a unique skill set and is possibly the greatest basketball mind of all time. Not to mention his on-the-court leadership is the foundation of the legendary Warriors culture. While he isn't as old as Lowry at only 32, he has been showing a steep progression in the last few seasons from a stats standpoint. And while it's the league's most open secret that we will be seeing Green around post-retirement either as an analysis coach or commentator, I could see him moving into a mentor-like role before retiring. I'll admit though, with Draymond Green there are still a few questions surrounding him. Doing a podcast immediately after a playoff game, including after a loss, or trying to leave the team to watch LeBron break the scoring record during a crucial stretch of games, that is a bit concerning and shows signs of someone needing a mentor himself. One NBA veteran who I think could go on to have a massive impact though is Derrick Rose. Rose's story of achieving the peak of basketball only to lose it all a few years later is pure tragedy, but regardless of the prime of his career being taken away from him, he is still respected widely from players and fans across the league. And Derrick Rose is far from the last star who's going to have his career derailed by injuries. Any athlete could tell you returning to the court after an injury can be just as big of a challenge mentally as it is physically. But I think Rose specifically would be able to help out guys like Zion Williamson, LaMelo, and Lonzo Ball. These are all great players who have suffered some pretty major injuries early in their career. And the last duo that I believe can be strong mentors are Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan. Both are 2 of the best at their respective positions over the 2010s. They are both champions at lost arts as well, that being rebounding for Kevin Love and the mid-range shot for DeMar DeRozan. Love is also not only an NBA champion, but a player who had to change up his entire playstyle when he left Minnesota for Cleveland. DeMar DeRozan is one of the greatest players in Raptors history and has recently seen his career fluctuate, especially after it looked like it was over in San Antonio. But the biggest reason why I think these 2 can be mentors and advocates for future players is their push for mental health not only for NBA players but across all of sports. I would bet every dollar I own that there is still some NBA player out there that is going through mental struggles that hasn't been able or that hasn't been confident to reach out yet. And that player is someone who can benefit from the guidance of one of these 2 guys. Look specifically at someone just like Ben Simmons. He has had a massive career change and has admittedly struggled at times from a mental standpoint. Imagine if he had someone like DeMar DeRozan or Kevin Love looking over his shoulder. Who knows the sort of impact that could have had on his career? Maybe not playing wise, but look at the kind of impact they may have had on him off the court or outside of the NBA. And while it may be too late for someone like Simmons, that doesn't mean that there won't be future players who also have this issue, and who could also benefit from DeRozan or Love. Now, it is debatable if any of these players will be able to, or will even want to play to the age of Haslem, but they have all dealt with very specific things throughout their careers, and all of them will be able to help out the next generation of players. Udonis Haslem is a rare case not just in the NBA, but across all of professional sports. Few players possess the ability that makes them more valuable as a player that never steps onto the court. But thanks to the consistency in Miami Heat culture, largely aided by Udonis Haslem, it wouldn't surprise me that within the next few seasons, we see a few more teams try to add Haslem-like player coaches to their roster.